Good evening to those on site, and good morning or just hello to all those online. Welcome to our DIJ Forum on Japanese politics, what keeps women out. A few years ago, we had a research focus here at DIJ about diversity and diversification in the Japanese workplace. Now we developed our program, and today this would be part of the research cluster on sustainability and resilience. We all know that sustainability includes inclusion. And so in the old days, people will talk about gender equality, and then the shift was towards diversity, and today it's about inclusion. When we look at gender, so-called international gender gap reports or ranking, we always see that not only Germany, even Japan more than Germany appears at the lower ranks, of these reports. And when you look at it in more detail, it's not because women don't have are at a disadvantage in education or in health. Education, health is actually where women are at least performing as well as men. The gap is basically produced in business, in the sphere of economics, but also in the sphere, even more so in the sphere of politics. And that is surprising because if you followed Japanese politics under the previous Prime Minister, Abe, there was Abenomics, but there also was womenomics. So it looked like, politics, is pushing the business world to become more open, to open up, to offer more opportunities for women. But then the political system itself in Japan seems to be even more closed. And today we'll hear why this might be the case. And we will look not so much at national politics, but more at local politics. And local politics, I mean, people who've done research in Japanese regions, local communities, they know that women are actually very active when it comes to voluntary work, sort of in the field of sort of civic engagement. But why are they not visible? Why don't they take positions in politics? Now, today we have, I'm very happy that we could win two speakers who've done a lot of research in this area. Emma Dalton from La Trobe University, Melbourne. She's presently visiting scholar at DIJ. And Naoko Oki from Sugiyama Jogakuen University in Aichi. And we will start with the two presentations in a row, and then we'll have a discussion. We'll have the presentations for about 20-25 minutes each. Emma will start, and then Naoko will follow, and then we'll have discussions. We'll have enough time for questions. We'll take questions here from the floor, but also from the online audience. The online audience is not visible to us. They cannot talk to us, but they can put questions in the Q&A. And we have two supporters here, Ms. Takahashi and Ms. Shima, and they will follow the Q&A in the Zoom here, and will bring the questions to our attention. Okay, so without further ado, Emma, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Franz, for that introduction. And thank you to the DIJ for allowing me to be a research fellow for the 3 weeks that I'm here. It's a great opportunity. So yeah, excuse my mask, I've got a cold and I don't want to give it to anyone who's next using the microphone. So as Franz just mentioned, I'm going to be talking about local politics, and specifically I'm talking about sexual harassment that women in local politics experience. So firstly, I'm going to set the scene by talking a bit about the big picture. So the enduring gender inequality in Japanese society, specifically the lack of women in positions of power. I'm going to be talking about sexual harassment in politics, how prevalent it is, and who's involved. If I have time, I'm going to try and explain the definition of sexual harassment, so what it is. Talking about the Japanese legal frameworks as well as the international context. So looking at local councils, local assemblies as workplaces. A case study of an institutional response to the problem. So I'll look at one council and women's individual responses to sexual harassment. So before going micro, let's start with some big picture context. So many of you will be aware of the annual World Economic Forum's report on the Global Gender Gap Index. Franz just mentioned this. This index measures the gap between men and women in countries throughout the world. And Japan performs very badly in this every year and actually has gotten worse. And this might be because things are getting worse in Japan, but it's also partly explained by the fact that it's getting better in other countries. So Japan is being left behind. Now I've got here Germany and Australia for obvious reasons. So Germany has gone quite high. So the most recent report, it's ranked 6. So these reports, I think Franz mentioned, that they measure the gap between men and women in 4 domains: educational attainment, health and survival, political representation, and economic empowerment. And they take into account the tenure of, for example, a female president or prime minister. And that's one of the reasons why Germany is doing so well, because Angela Merkel was in power for many years. Okay, so this breaks it down a little bit. So 4 domains. And as you can see, the politics and the economic empowerment domains are the ones where Japan does really badly. So just to give you a comparative idea of what a country that ranks high looks like on this little diagram compared to Japan. So this report is pretty good for showing differences between men's and women's political and economic power in Japan. It doesn't capture everything though. So even though Japan is ranked 47th in education, there is still a gap within the educational field. So men and women, or boys and girls, are attaining the same level of education. There's as many girls going into higher education as boys now, but many are still going into what are they called? Short colleges, tankidai, short colleges. And they're also, for example, Tokyo University, those big major universities, there's a big gender gap there. Only about 20% of students are girls. And there's also a big gap in STEM. Girls aren't going into STEM as much as boys. And also we know, for example, that Japanese education authorities have for decades been keeping girls out of certain educational institutes, as we learnt in, I think it was 2020 or 2019, when the Tokyo Medical University scandal broke out, where it was exposed that many universities were applying a reverse gender quota to keep girls out of the university. So dropping their grades in the entrance examinations. This is also happening in certain high schools in Tokyo. So the gap between the education unfortunately persists. Nevertheless, they are, there's an improvement in terms of attainment, educational attainment. So what are girls and women doing with their education? Well, they're not getting very far in academia. So the day after I arrived in Tokyo last week, I read this article in the Asahi Shimbun. The left-hand graph shows the percentage of women teachers in higher education. So Japan is right down the bottom amongst OECD countries. 30% of teachers in higher education are women, compared to the 46.3% average in the OECD. The graph on the right side shows the proportion of women in the different levels of teaching positions. So as you can see, women teaching staff are concentrated in low-ranked and comparatively low-paid positions like assistant lecturer. Okay, so women aren't doing too well in academia, and we know that from the Global Gender Gap Index that economically women are not doing too well either. So what does this mean specifically? So I'll just give you a bit of a snapshot with statistics. So women are now in the workforce in Japan at really high rates, like higher than the OECD average. So the labour force participation rate for women is now like above 70%, which is higher than America, higher than a lot of other countries. But this doesn't mean that they are actually gaining financial independence or a living wage even. So 55% of women earn less than 3 million per year, and 40% earn less than 2 million yen. And for those of you living in Japan, you know how much this is, you know what this means. There's a pension gap between men and women, which is quite large. And in the hierarchy, so in management positions, women are comparatively absent, one of the lowest in the world. And the labour force in Japan is stratified by gender and according to non-regular and regular workers. So most regular workers are male, most non-regular workers are women. And this affects women's pay, women's job stability, and their ability to be financially independent. Okay, so getting to politics, this is the national picture. So this is the Inter-Parliamentary Union statistics. 16% of the national legislature, which is the Diet in Japan, those 16% of the seats are held by women, which is one of the lowest in the world. So I've just got some countries there for comparative purposes. So as you can see, Japan's pretty low. Okay, and here are the averages in regions. So the Americas are at the top. That's mainly because of South America. South America countries have gender quotas and very high percentages of women in their national parliaments. Then Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, Pacific, and the Middle East. So Japan's average of Japan's percentage of 16% is on a par with the Middle East and North Africa. Okay, so the Japanese political system is a three-tiered system. We've got the national level, and we've got prefectural level, city and ward level, and town and village level. And I've got in brackets there the percentage of women in seats on at those levels of politics. And Naoko and I today are talking specifically about the sub-national level, so prefectures, city wards, and towns and villages. So let's get into sexual harassment. So sexual harassment is one of the barriers to increased female political participation, and it has become a topic of interest over the last few years, and it has been recognised as one of the barriers to increased women's political participation. So I've just got a diagram here to demonstrate which direction the harassment flows in. So politician in the middle, a politician can harass a staff member. Politician can also be harassed by a staff member. Politicians are also harassed by members of public, so voters or potential voters. Politicians can harass each other. And politicians have also been known to harass journalists. I'm not sure I've heard of the other way around though. Okay, so in terms of statistics, how prevalent is sexual harassment on municipal councils? One of the first surveys about this was done in 2014 by a group called the Alliance of Feminist Representatives. And they discovered that just over half of women had experienced sexual harassment. And that was really sort of the beginning of the media and the public interest in sexual harassment in politics. And since then, there have been a lot of surveys into the issue. 2019, Asahi Shimbun surveyed first termers and found that a quarter of them had experienced sexual harassment. The following year, the Cabinet Office survey found that nearly 60% of women politicians had been bullied. So not necessarily sexual harassment, but bullied, compared to just over a third of men. This is the most recent one that I've seen in the newspaper, 2021, specifically in Kagoshima Prefecture. So this is just results from the Minami Nihon Shinbun survey of local councillors. So of the 74 female members surveyed, 41 had been subjected to sexual harassment either during the election period or during their tenure on the council. So on the top box is during the election campaign. So we've got a voter, if you let me touch you, I will vote for you. Coerced sexual relations, being told, oh, if you can't even plan your own pregnancy, then what can you do? Being given unsolicited advice about having children, and assault. And in the second box, we've got, not necessarily sexual harassment, but incidents that were articulated as being troubling. So a comment, if you have a child, I'll support you. Not being enough toilets, having, getting into problems when they've got their period, work-life balance, being expected or being asked to pour the tea by male colleagues, and being boxed into gender stereotypes. Okay, so in 2019, I interviewed 44 members of councils across the country from all levels, but mostly local levels. So I've just got who I interviewed in table form here. So as you can see, I interviewed, how many is that? 6 Diet members, but the rest were subnational council members. Most of them were women. The green bracketed people are men, but most of them were women. So I interviewed them to ask them about their opinions on sexual harassment and experiences of it as well, and what their councils were doing about it, if anything. So I've just got some examples of one woman's experience of multiple types of sexual harassment. Fujimura was 37, she's a member of a city council in Tokyo. So she was inundated with requests from voters to meet up. So they would call her and say, oh, can we talk about so-and-so issue? But then when she went to meet them, they would ask her to get married or go on a date or have sex or something. So this is harassment by a constituent. She was assaulted by an old man at a local dinner event. Another example of harassment by a constituent. She was also harassed by a colleague who she shared an office with, who asked her every day why she wasn't married yet and when she was going to have children. And another example of harassment by a colleague was when she went out at night time with them, she was expected to pour the drinks and she felt like she can't say no. I've just got some more examples here. This woman, Yamada, was 47 and a member of a town council in southwestern Japan. So she was in a council meeting and thought that the man who was talking, another councillor, was using language that wasn't fit for the council, and said to the chair, can you please censure him? I don't like the way he's talking. It's lowering the quality of the council. And the man in question just yelled at her and said, women need to shut up. Okano is a 49-year-old member of a city council, also in southwestern Japan. So she told me that she felt like no one really took her seriously. So in order to combat that, she wore glasses, even though she didn't need them. And she put her hair up in a ponytail because she felt like she wasn't taken seriously when her hair was down. She was also told that's reverse sexual harassment when she wore a V-neck blouse. Another 56-year-old woman of a town council in southwestern Japan. Now, this woman was the only woman on her council and the first woman ever on her council. And she was at the receiving end of unwelcome commentary about her clothes. And Hashimoto, also the only woman in a town council in southwestern Japan, was accused of having an affair with a male member of a different council because they went out for dinner to talk about work. She ended up having to face a committee to explain herself. Okay, so what is harassment? The examples I gave just then, some of you might be thinking, that doesn't sound like harassment, that sounds like, annoyances, irritations. And the definition of sexual harassment, even in Western countries, is vague because it can range from, like commentary about, oh, why aren't you married, to assault. That's the way people use it. Legally, that's not necessarily what it is. But that's the way people use sexual harassment when they talk about it. Sexual harassment in Japan comes under the Equal Employment Opportunity Law, Article 11 specifically. But most people don't use this to claim sexual harassment claims. And I'm not going to go into that because I don't have time. But the Equal Employment Opportunity Law is for employers. So it places the onus of responsibility to prevent sexual harassment on employers. Now, politicians aren't employed by anyone. They're elected. So the Equal Employment Opportunity Law doesn't help politicians. Now, this has the fact that politics is this weird sort of grey zone that's not covered by normal workplace laws came to attention to many academics and many politicians in the last sort of 10, 15 years. And the violence against women in politics framework is a useful one to think about this. And much of the groundwork for this, the creation of this framework, was done in Latin America, where women politicians faced serious violence. In 2012, Bolivia created a law to combat violence against women in politics specifically, and a few other South American countries followed suit. This framework of understanding harassment and violence against women in politics gradually spread around the world, and countries like the UK and Canada began implementing codes of conduct. The first iteration of the Code of Conduct for the House of Commons in the UK was the outcome of an inquiry into the problem by Dame Laura Cox. She had this to say at the end of her inquiry. The nature and extent of the allegations of bullying, harassment and sexual harassment made against other members of House staff, as well as against some members of Parliament, are disturbing, and the effects of such misconduct have been exacerbated by the inadequate procedures in place to tackle them. Extensive experience in the field of employment law over several decades, involving many different public and private sector employers, marks the House out as a stark reminder of how bad things used to be. So we can see here that politics as a workplace appears to be stuck in an era before sexual harassment was taken seriously. This is the case in many countries, and Japan is no exception. Since I conducted fieldwork in 2019, things have certainly changed, and the issue of sexual harassment in politics has gained a lot of media attention, at least. There remains, however, a lack of mechanisms that prohibit or even attempt to prevent sexual harassment in politics. Women politicians who are harassed, and even staff who work on councils, often have nowhere to go, or when they go to their superiors, their concerns are brushed off. I'm not going to do this because I don't have time. So forget about the top half of that slide. For the bottom half, recent developments. In 2018, the Act on Promotion of Gender Equality in the Political Field was implemented, and this law was specifically to encourage or urge political parties to adopt like gender targets so that more women would be elected to office. In 2021, this law was revised to include a provision on preventing sekahara and matahara, so sexual harassment or maternity harassment, either via political party or assembly measures. Now, there's no enforcement mechanisms. It's one of those laws that encourages political parties to do something about sexual harassment. Okay, so I just want to talk before I end about how women respond to sexual harassment in the absence of legal frameworks and actual response mechanisms, institutional mechanisms. How do they respond individually? So the first quote I've got here is from Muta Kazue, who is an academic expert on sexual harassment in the workplace. In the Japanese culture, which requires harmony and accommodativeness, reading the room is a skill required of men and women of all ages. Refrain from saying what you think, hold it in, and conform to the other person. Nemoto Kumiko is an expert in, she researches women in the white-collar workforce. She also did a bit of work on sexual harassment. A man's humiliation of women workers follows the hegemonic script of gender in the Japanese workplace, wherein women workers are expected to tolerate man's rude behaviours by saying nothing. I won't read this, but this, these are English language Western academics, but here they outline coping strategies by women who are affected by sexual harassment, and note that often women do not go to authorities, but they cognitively and emotionally cope with the harassment. And I found this to be true amongst the women that I interviewed. So the first coping mechanism is to tolerate it, learning how to tolerate it. So many women enter politics and are a bit surprised when they first encounter sexual harassment, but then over the years, they get used to it and they develop coping mechanisms. The second coping mechanism is to deny or minimise it. And this is a very common coping mechanism in male-dominated sectors. So you'll find this in politics, you find it in the military is another area where this sort of coping mechanism by women who experience sexual harassment is very common. So I'll read the second quote because it's quite interesting. Many people in the council are my father's age, so sexist jokes are the norm. I've never been the kind of person to be fazed by sekuhara. Even if someone says something, well, actually, I had never really been verbally harassed, perhaps because of my short hair that made me look unlike a woman. I was perceived more like a young man. I'm not really the kind of woman to get into trouble with sekuhara. I was just able to let it go, and I still am. So if a sexual harassment comment emerges from the old man brigade, even if it's not directed at me, I let them know, even though I'm fine, that their words are sexual harassment. So there's a lot of contradictions in this quote. So she, on the one hand, says she has never really experienced it, but she's okay with it too when it does happen. So it doesn't affect her. She's cool with it. Another coping mechanism is to repress it. So this particular woman was 59 years old. She went out with her colleagues and the Nijikai. She was taken to a sex venue. And she was really, really shocked by this. So the next day she consulted the committee chair, and the committee chair just sort of brushed it off and said, you shouldn't have gone. So she didn't really have the strength to go public with it. And she repressed it to the point where the 2014 survey that I mentioned earlier about sexual harassment on municipal councils, she filled that out. And she said that she couldn't even write it on the anonymous survey. So which raises questions about how much we hear about sexual harassment, if there are some women who aren't even capable of writing about their experiences on an anonymous survey. So there's a lot of victim blaming going on. Okay, I'll just show this diagram because I like how this sort of expresses what I've just been talking about. So women's responses to sekuhara that I have just discussed should be understood within the political and social context that I've tried to represent here. Firstly, women being elected into politics is an intrusion into what is a male space. For women in small town Japan, where many councils have very few or even no women, this is acutely so. Once a woman enters this space, if she is sexually harassed, adopting one or some of the responses I've discussed, that is to accommodate, deny or repress the incident, makes sense. On top of the fact that the workplace is male-dominated, she is working in a male-dominated environment which operates within the broader cultural context of Japan, the comprehension of which helps to understand the responses further still. So this broader culture is characterised by sexist social values and norms, where it is, for example, expected that women pour tea or sake, where it is deviant for women to not have children to care for or a husband to look after. Sorry about that. It's also a society where complaining is frowned upon. So having a stiff upper lip is a sign of adulthood. And complaining about things is seen as childish and selfish. Rocking the boat is best avoided, and going with the flow is expected. Japan is also a society that often blames the victim, so speaking out is dangerous, and women who are subjected to sexual harassment know this. Taking these things into account will help understand why women who experience sexual harassment accommodate, deny, or repress. This is true in any work context, but for women who experience this in politics, particularly at the local level, they must also deal with the fact that legal or professional recourse is difficult. Instead, if they are lucky, their superior, their council chair, or another person in a position of influence will take them seriously if they decide to speak to them. If they are unlucky, well, they are unlucky. So why is sexual harassment in politics a problem? Apart from the obvious reasons, it can prevent women from staying in politics or even running for office. Having so few women in politics leads to a distortion of policy creation that neglects women's interests, and this is particularly acute on smaller councils and in rural Japan, where there can be very few elected women or none, and where ideas about women's social and political roles seem stuck in the past. So I wrote a book about this. If you want to learn more, here it is. Thank you, and I'm sorry if I went over time.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Naoko from Sugiyama Jogakuen University in Aichi. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful forum, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to have a presentation before the audience. So my title is Women's Participation in Local Politics, especially recruitment system in Japan. Today's contents. And introduction is here. As Emma said, Japan is ranked as the 125th among 146 countries in Global Gender Gap Index this year. Especially political empowerment is ranked at 138th, which includes women in parliament, women in municipal position, and years with female male head of state. This ranking is very extremely low. And the percentage of women in the lower house is 10.3%, ranked at the 164th place among 193 countries. And the percentage of women in local assemblies of Japan is as low as in the diet. For example, at local level, the percentage of women is 15.6% in 2022, and especially prefectural assembly, the percentage of women is 11.8%. This assembly is the most difficult local assemblies for women to enter. However, since the 2010s, policies for promoting women's participation in national and local assembly membership elections are enacted and revised. The Act on Promotion of Gender Equality in the Political Field was enacted in 2018, and it asks political parties to do efforts to make the number of male and female candidates be as even as possible, not parity, in elections of the members of the Diet and the local assemblies, while securing the freedom of political activity by the parties. And the revised act react political parties to prevent sexual and maternity harassment during their candidate recruitment processes. In December 2020, the numerical target the duty to make efforts of proportion of female candidates to be members of the Diet and local assemblies is set at 35% by 2025 in the fifth basic plan for gender equality. So today's topic is how is not women's participation in local politics promoted. The second section is local women in local assemblies in Japan. According to the comparative research by UN Women, the percentage of women in local assemblies of Japan is almost low. This is the map of the UN Women. So this map shows women's representation in elected local assembly deliberative bodies according to the percentage of the women countries are divided. Japan belongs to 10 to 14% groups, so yellow. However, the percentage of women local assemblies has been increasing since the 1980s, just like this. This shows women's candidate and elected candidate in nationwide local assembly membership elections in Japan from 1947 to 2023. Blue column is the number of female candidates, and the yellow column is number of women elected. And the red line is the percentage of women, and the green line is proportion of women among elected candidates. So in 2023, 586 female candidates ran, and the 2,943 are elected. Women for round 4 and were elected at local assemblies mainly as independents or members of the Japanese Communist Party and Komeito Party and the NATO. However, at the prefectural level, there was a remarkable increase in women legislators of the DPJ, the former ruling party, and the LDP. This graph shows proportion of women in local assemblies in Japan in total. So yellow line is JCP and the pink line is independence. And on the other hand, the professional level, JCP yellow line and JCP and the pink line is independent, and this line is Minshuto, and this blue line is LDP, Jiminto. So how so few women are, in local assemblies? There are some accountants for women upon the representation in politics. First of all, social and or cultural factors and personal factors. For example, women are less likely than men to run for office because of gender-related issues. Women are running later in life after carrying child or their fathers and mothers, and to recruit women than men as candidates, and they are exposed to sexual and or maternal harassment. And another is structural factors, for example, types of election systems, size of district magnitude, party system, informal rule of advantage incumbency in recruitment process, and gender quotas, candidate recruitment system, and so on. Especially in Japan, there are little changes in election system. The electoral system of Japanese local assemblies is almost the same of that as the 1946 except for a significant decrease in the number of the seats caused by merger of cities, towns, and villages. And we have only voluntary political party quotas, and this quota is not without any penalties. And the main barriers to women's participation in professional assembly membership election are passive attitudes toward recruitment of female candidates by major political parties, because half of prefectural assembly members are endorsed by the LDP. And the type of election is another problem for women. For example, about 30% of all the districts are single-member districts, in which the success rate of female candidates is the lowest among local assembly elections. And especially the LDP and the Komeito Party, which have formed a coalition government since 2012, recruit a smaller proportion of female candidates at prefectural assembly membership elections like this. So in local election 2023, how do political parties recruit women? In nationwide local election 2022-3, the percentage and the number of female candidates and women elected have become the highest record. The number of women who ran for and were elected at professional elections increased from 389 to 489, from 2,037 to 3,110 respectively. There are characteristics of women's participation in professional membership election. The first is a remarkable increase in women legislators of the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, Rikken, Minshuto, and the LDP and the Komeito Party. According to the research of the Cabinet Office, the CDPJ set a numerical goal 30%, but the LDP and Komeito did not show their target. The second characteristic is the number of women who ran and were elected as independents has increased in 2023. As in 2019, there is a trend of forcing women who run for election in specific districts such as Kagawa, Fukuoka, and Kagoshima, where women's group aiming to increase female politicians are activated in election 2023. And the JCP, Kyosanto Party, set a numerical goal of 50% of the proportion of female candidates and achieved it at local assemblies of prefectures, ordinance designated cities, and Tokyo special wards. However, there is a decrease in the number of women and men nominated by the JCP. So JCP is smaller than before. And in provincial assembly membership elections in 2022, there is an increase of women elected as independents, including members of women's group aiming for increasing women, and members of major parties which do not officially plan to increase the number of female candidates. So what does this trend mean? The purpose of this paper is critically review how women's participation in local assembly promoted by analyzing preliminary result of prefectural election by sex, incumbency, and affiliations. This table shows a number of candidate and elected candidate in professional membership election in 2023. For example, the left column, LDP, the number of newcomer candidates and the newcomer female candidate and male candidate, and so on. From the data, we have some findings. First of all, the first is the number of female candidates and women elected by parties and incumbency shows the LDP and the CDPJ are ranked as the third and fourth places respectively in number of female candidates. However, they recruit more incumbent female candidates than newcomer ones because of the remaining principle of incumbent priorities. There are several incumbent women of the LDP who were elected as independents in 2019 and who were elected as candidates endorsed by the party in 2023. Traditionally, the LDP recruits incumbents as its certificated candidates who were independents. And the next one is Komeito party recruits more newcomer female candidates than incumbent ones. And the total number of candidates of Komeito party is almost the same. So the proportion of women has increased significantly. The third finding is independent newcomer female candidates is in the table includes the number of women's groups which aim for increasing female politicians in specific dialects. Several members of the group have been elected in 2023. So my paper in 2023 referred to our new trend of fostering and recruiting women by women's group at the municipal level in election 2019. The success of women's groups in the presidential elections means the possibility that the movement to foster and support women by women's group can be more successful both at municipal and presidential levels. So this is tentative conclusion. The participation of women in local assemblies has made a steady progress. Though the percentage of women elected is about 20%, this is not so high as scores of other countries. And there is a new trend in proportion of female candidates in the major parties, as the number of women of the LDP, CDPJ, and the Komeito party has increased. However, the trend does not mean the simply sharply increasing number of newcomer female candidates of the parties. So this shows the parties have still passive attitude toward the recruitment of female candidates. And the number of independent female candidates is the highest among newcomer female candidates. The increasing number of independent women means the activated movement to foster and support women by women's group, and it can be more successful, not only at municipal, but also at presidential levels. So this is a research interest in the future. What kind of career do newcomer women have, and why were independent newcomer female candidates able to be elected in the prefectural assemblies, the most difficult place for women to enter? Thank you for listening.